This is the Outcome Economy Podcast. Welcome to a new era.
The best strategies, business models, and jobs today are all about outcomes, not about input or output or products or billable hours. They are focused on the ultimate value for the customer, the outcomes for all stakeholders. We meet the leaders of this new era. We talk about their goals and how they work with their teams to achieve them. Are you ready? Welcome. My name is Johannes. I'm the CEO and founder of WorkPath, and I'm here today with Christopher Freese. Christopher is a senior partner and managing director at BCG, Boston Consulting Group. He leads the global digital business in the BCG insurance practice, I think mostly focused on the German-speaking markets. In his role, he's also an important driver of BCG's Agile at Scale practice. But the word to you, Chris, is all of that correct? Am I missing something? Would you like to introduce yourself with a couple of words?
Thanks a lot, Johannes. Thanks for having me. Yes, that was perfect. So I think I handed over my role in digital actually, but I'm now driving our GenAI business in insurance globally. Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And we'll come to GenAI in a moment. I think that's really the focus, right? What's the impact of AI on corporate strategies in 2024? And what are your particular insights from the insurance industry and beyond? But maybe we start with a more personal question first. As most of you know, the reason why we have the Outcome Economy podcast is that we at WorkPath are really obsessed with outcomes, outcome-based strategies, outcome-based strategy execution, and as a part of that, also outcome-based ways of working and organizations. That's what we call the outcome economy, but it's more like the how of how we enable companies. And what we do in simple terms is just we enable leaders and organizations to define and achieve their most important goals. So let's talk about goals. And maybe we start with that personal question. What are your goals right now? What are your goals for the year? And how do you achieve your goals? How do you work on them?
That's a very broad question and a difficult one too. So on a personal level, I'd say after a couple of years that have been quite difficult, for multiple reasons with everything happening around us. I think, looking into 2024, I'd say my goal is to be a little bit more at ease and enjoy a little bit more of lightness compared to what we've experienced probably in the last 5 years. That clearly is a goal for me, and on a business level, I'd say since I took over a new topic that sort of fits perfectly into how to digitize companies, how to make them more agile, and now how to use this new technology to make them more successful. I think making this a big part of our business and truly making a difference in the insurance industry. That would be my number one goal for 2024.
And as we are talking about AI, Gen AI, how is that for your own work, not just for your customers? Like, do you regularly use any kind of AI-based applications in day-to-day work already?
Yes, of course, I do. Even though I'm still the baby boomer generation, so probably my adaptation to this is a little bit slower than yours. But yes, I do. And basically, what we did at BCG was, to understand what the technology does in terms of productivity and helping, people do their day-to-day work, especially in knowledge-based jobs like ours.
Yeah.
We started an experiment together with MIT mid last year to understand. I think 3,000 or 4,000 of our consultants participated to understand what AI does to our job. And depending on the task you have as a consultant, there are areas where, especially individuals, when doing analysis, market research, these kind of things, but also producing content, we see an uplift of 40% productivity. for our jobs as well. So what that will do to our job and the way we do business, we don't know yet. I think that's a big unknown for every company right now, but
Yeah.
clearly it will have a big impact on the consulting industry as well.
I mean, that would have been my next question anyways, from you personally then to your work in your teams at BCG. I think it's an honest answer to say, like, we all need to figure it out to some extent, but do you have already certain examples, teams, I don't know, the teams creating content where you're like, that's actually where we're using AI and that's how it's changing something?
Yeah, I think, in a number of areas, I'd say, so the teams, we're currently, starting. This is the newest thing we just introduced, I think, 2 weeks ago. Dexter, we're now, using this to create slides. And if you're in the consulting industry for a long time, there are a couple of simple rules that apply to how you actually visualize content. And it's, every generation needs new training.
Yeah.
Slides are typically too full, too small fonts, unclear messaging. So AI is already helping us improve that. So it's going to be interesting whether this is going to be taken over by AI, because it's much simpler to define rules and then have a trained model, so create this kind of content. So that's where we're using it, obviously, in analysis, in all kind of market analysis, etc. There's a lot of our work, actually. A lot of long nights are put into understanding markets in, I don't know, what's the life insurance market in Peru. That takes some time to find out a lot of documents you need to read. AI can clearly help us, be more productive there. And then obviously also in creating content, right? Summarizing stuff. We start using it, I must say, to record and summarize video conferencing.
Yeah.
So a lot of different things sort of blend into our work life, and we'll see how far that goes. But I'm pretty sure we'll see a lot more to come.
It really feels like something has began to move last year, but it's still really very much day one. I agree. So if we zoom out a little bit, you are driving several topics and initiatives at BCG, also on a global level. So if we talk about AI in enterprises, in businesses, how would you describe that? Like, how does that behave in Europe versus the US or in other markets you might be able to talk about? Everyone, I guess, has their own approach to it, but do you see certain kind of patterns? We just recently had the EU launch the AI Act. So what do you observe there working with businesses?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. Now I have obviously more of a perspective on what the insurance industry is doing globally, but this also very much applies. If I look at BCG's numbers, applies to other industries as well. The US is clearly leading the way in terms of investments, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of scaling or starting to scale this technology to make companies better. So just as a quick comparison, so we've been maybe let me start there. We've done a CEO tour to the West Coast, second week of January, to understand what's cooking in the valley, basically. So we spoke to a number of the players there, and it was quite enlightening, and you can feel the vibe and the interest in the topic and the willingness to change the world, etc., etc. If you take your typical European insurance company, you don't really feel that vibe, I must say. And it's interesting that that in the US. Also, traditional companies have started to apply and invest big time into AI. and to change their business models with it. So, I can't give you an exact number, but just from BCG's data, I'd say probably in the US we see 10 times, 10x the investment we see in Europe.
Yeah.
In traditional companies to actually work with AI, especially Gen AI now.
Yeah.
And for Asia, I think it's very different. Different. Just quickly. I think China is trying to lead the charge as well. There's a lot going on there. Japan, being more conservative, I would say more in the camp of where European companies are. Southeast Asia, probably a different picture again. So it's really, it's a mix of different ways of approaching that. So I think, globally, not surprisingly, the US and then China are probably the most active players.
It fits the brand and the expectations you would have.
Yes.
Yeah, but I
Yes.
have similar
Exactly.
impressions there. Yeah. In a recent conversation we had, you said AI seems to be among the top three priorities for
Yeah.
most executives right now. So do you also see investments in AI find their way into corporate strategies beyond like smaller experiments? You mentioned it a little bit, right? You gave a hint in the US. It can be quite significant already what you see there, but on a mid to a long term horizon compared to those experiments and initiatives, what do you see there? What do you expect?
Yeah. So I think at least in my industry, or the financial services industry, I'd say we only see the tip of the iceberg right now.
Mhm.
We're only at best at the start of all of this. And if you just take the billions of euros or dollars that need to be invested in IT systems in the insurance industry, but also in the banking industry, what is invested in Gen AI is just a tiny, tiny fraction. That's not even a percentage of their overall investments in technology. So we're just at the beginning to see this happen right now. I think part of the problem is honestly that every company, at least we consult, they have their budget completely planned.
Mhm.
And since we're talking about a regulated industry, they have a lot to do, just to fulfill regulatory or to be regulatory compliant. They have big IT transformation programs going on, so it's not easy to fit in a new technology that no one really had on the radar a year ago. Into that. So that's a reason, I think. So it's going to take longer than we expect. The technology will be much faster in developing than we see our companies deploy it. But it's going to happen. I'm pretty sure about that.
So you say it's the tip of the iceberg. Things have started to move. Things are accelerating in many industries. At the same time, I also hear more and more people talking about this feels like a bubble blowing up here. I think more and more CIOs tell me like what Microsoft charges, just as one example for the Copilot. It's like it's clearly not worth paying double, way too expensive, and somehow it doesn't materialize yet where companies have started those experiments. How do you look at that?
Yeah. So it's a very valid point, and we hear that a lot as well. And it's true, by the way, right? It's expensive. It takes a lot of cloud consumption. The tokens are quite expensive, depending on the model you look at. And if you don't, on the other hand, make sure that the productivity you gain with it is actually used either to cut cost or to grow more or whatever, then you pay double. And so I think what you hear and what people observe is correct. But let me tell you one thing: it's clearly not a bubble. it's everything else than a bubble. It fundamentally changes the way. So I think what GenAI really does, it's, many call it the iPhone moment. I like the analogy a little, but it's a little bit like you had your iPhone for the first time and suddenly you interacted, or we all interacted with the internet in a very different way because,
Yeah.
apps were created. Apple created the famous and infamous App Store.
Which also
And
took some time,
suddenly,
right? Like most people forget
yes,
that App Store was not there day one, not in that way
yeah,
we know today.
yes, and we had a very different way of interacting with the internet, right? It was
Yeah.
much less productive for us. And I think the same is true for AI, and GenAI sort of creates the connection. And I mean, all of the analysis we're doing, and yes, consultants are always, have a tendency to also over exaggerate the change we see coming, but it's clearly not a bubble. This is going to be around for a long, long time. It's a little bit like the internet from my point of view. And it might even have a bigger influence. I think it's actually going to have a bigger influence than digital or the internet in what companies are doing. If you look at, digital and the influence of the internet has been most prominent in B2C businesses, right? With travel and
Yeah.
clearly, with all kinds of retail. It hasn't really fundamentally changed a couple of, traditional industries. I think AI and Gen AI will fundamentally change the way they work, will fundamentally change the way we all work. And I don't, I couldn't tell you what all of this is going to do, how this is going to end up. But yes, it's not a bubble. They all need to deal with it. It's early days, and we'll see a lot coming.
Yeah. So we'll zoom into the insurance industry and like how this industry looks at AI, different fields of application along the customer journey in the insurance industry. But for one more question, let's stay on that general level. And
Yeah.
given your statement, it's not a bubble. This might be as big as the internet. What are then the common mistakes companies might be making right now when thinking about AI, investing into AI, doing these experiments?
Yeah. So I think the number one mistake we see, and we try to, tell our clients to avoid it if possible. The number one mistake is to do the same thing they've done with AI. So AI, especially when you use AI for prediction, has been used in certain pockets of your business model, but it never really scaled anywhere,
Yeah.
right? So people have invested a lot in AI in the past without being able to scale it to productivity. So there's an imbalance between, what do I invest and what do I get out of it? And obviously, companies, and that's what you mentioned, the CIOs you talk to, they look at this and they say, we don't know whether this is going to be the same thing. Now, GenAI will scale in a very different way because it's not about predicting in small pockets. It's about, using technology to be much more productive, and you can use simple knowledge-based models across a company. So in every function. So it's not just a tiny use case, which is why I'm trying to avoid to use use case when I talk about GenAI, because that's not what it's about, I think. And so in AI, companies ended up with what we call the thousand flowers blooming approach. So you have thousand flowers and they all make sense, but it's nice to look at, but it doesn't really create value for the company, and that needs to change. So I think the biggest mistake is to apply it everywhere
Mm-hmm.
with limited resources in terms of financing and people, and tech talent especially. And staying sort of on the surface of all of it. I think you have to go deep to really change the way you work, and it makes more sense from our point of view to do that in a certain function or in a certain area and not apply it everywhere. I think it's good if everyone uses Copilot, don't get me wrong, to just make people, it's like giving your employees access to the internet. I think that makes a ton of sense, but it doesn't really change your productivity.
Yeah.
If you want to change productivity, you will have to look at it very differently.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about how AI will be changing ways of working. However,
Mhm.
the focus of our conversation today is going to be, in general, a bit more about how AI finds its way into corporate strategy and particularly
Mhm.
for the insurance industry. So
Mhm.
before we do that industry deep dive, just a short recommendation for our audience. My co-founder Pascal and I, we just recently recorded a webinar on the role and the status quo of AI in the context of strategy and strategy execution, of strategy work in general. So if you're interested in that, how will it change your work in a strategy team or on a strategy in the future? We'll put a link to that into the show notes. But that's just because today, again, is more about the content of strategy and how companies in the insurance industry look at it. So, because how does the insurance industry approach it? I think maybe generally, but then also thinking in terms of the different key functions within an insurer.
Yeah. So I think the important perspective is we see a couple of companies doing the right thing. So if getting back to what I said, what I find the biggest mistake is for companies. Looking into the US, right? I think they spend, as I said, 10x right now on these kind of things, even in the insurance industry.
Mhm.
What we do see is that depending on the insurance business they are doing. So, they work with AI and Gen AI in different areas. So let me give you two examples. One is commercial insurance, basically, insuring companies against, fire or production fallouts or whatever. Um, the key success factor in that industry is to be able, when a broker comes in and says, I have company X needs to be insured, do you want to do it? It takes them a week or two to identify all the risks that come along with this company and understand them better, come up with a price, and finally make an offer.
Yeah.
And then underwrite the business. That's too long, right? So if you can speed up that process, you're going to be advantaged. And so they work in underwriting. They try to assemble all of the documents that underwriters read right now to understand the risk of a company or a company risk. Assemble them, summarize them, make it much easier for them to decide. So it's basically decision support. It's a decision support system that takes down, the time to actually give a quote from, depending on the product, obviously, from 2 weeks to a day or a couple of hours. That really makes a difference. And that's what commercial insurance companies in the US are working on. And by the way, in the UK as well. And, this is bleeding into, I would say, continental Europe as well. The other example is if you take a typical retail player with car insurance, these kind of things, where you really differentiate is in claims, how you handle claims, how quickly you do it, how fairly it's perceived by your customers, and in customer service. I mean, whoever has called in insurance lately, uh, it's no fun at all, right? First of all, you
Yeah.
wait 20 minutes on the phone, and then they don't solve your problem, basically. So that's what retail P&C insurance companies focus on. So it's really, some of them are doing what I just said. Take your differentiating factor uh, where you can create competitive advantage and use Gen AI to optimize that before you spread it everywhere.
Got it. So I think, yeah, very, very obvious and easy to understand cases in the underwriting and to some extent probably also in the pricing process,
Mhm. Yeah.
claims management, right? I think that's where you see a lot in even beyond the industry, in help
Mhm.
desk and service centers and like how to handle that. I think there we see a lot of companies growing and use
Yeah.
cases that are AI based. How about
Mhm.
distribution and sales? Do you see that as well?
Yes, I think there's, those are probably the four most important areas, right, in the
Yeah.
insurance industry: claims, underwriting, service, and then sales and distribution. I think the opportunity in sales and distribution is huge. I just feel I wouldn't advise companies to start there right now because it's so much more complicated, right? Most of the distribution you can't really control, right? Whether it's brokers or banks you distribute with, or even your agents. The agents are free agents. Huh? They are sort of tied to your company, but they're nevertheless their own entrepreneurs. So you can't really tell them this is how you're going to do business. So it's a lot about giving them more support, taking off admin burden, giving them more cross-selling recommendations, these kind of things. But you spend a lot of money on that, and the question is, do they really use it, right? Most of the insurance agents are baby boomers as well.
Yeah.
They will leave the workforce at some point in time, which is going to be a huge problem. So we need a different way of distributing. Chatbots powered by GenAI could clearly help. And this is going to evolve over time, right? And the new generation is is easily going to use all of these tools, but that's not the reality in insurance distribution right now. So that's why I'd focus on stuff which you can control and where you can create value quickly, and do distribution in the second step.
Got it. It feels like that's level 1 or 2, right? A lot of those application fields, it's going to be taking existing processes and making them more efficient, faster. You mentioned, I think, about 40% productivity increase that can be expected for your own industry, and it's
Yeah,
probably similar in a lot of white collar jobs and job groups.
yeah.
If we think a bit bigger beyond making the underwriting process faster and more efficient, what do you think? How could the future of insurance look like because of AI? Could this bring more fundamental change beyond speed, efficiency, productivity?
Mm. So if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said yes.
Huh?
Now, after, I think we were thinking about this in the same way when we first discussed, what is e-commerce in the late 90s doing to the insurance industry. If I look at the past 20 years of digitization in insurance, I'm a little bit disappointed, of how little it actually changed the business model.
Uh-huh.
Despite all the efforts done by also me personally and BCG. I'm not sure. I think the biggest protection to the business model we see in financial services is regulation. So it's very difficult for new ways of doing that business
Mhm.
to really compete with these large companies. While I think there's a lot that could be changed and could be changed to the better, I'm just not sure how quickly it's going to happen, Johannes, because I think so. That first step you were talking about, I think, is going to take already 5 to 10 years to apply, and then we'll see how other players actually enter the market and create a different way of doing that business. And
I
and
was
I think
about to
as
ask, yeah,
yeah
probably I mean, regulation is hopefully true for all companies in the market, but
yeah
this sounds a bit like the biggest threat can come from companies, and it can be major companies in other industries coming from the technology
hmm
space and really changing industry insurance on a more profound level, right?
hmm yeah. I agree, but what every player is doing, and we've tried so many different things. Every player from the outside is doing is taking one piece of insurance and trying to compete there. I think that's just very difficult to do because for multiple reasons it's a very integrated model. We actually when I wasn't even a partner then. I mean, this is, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, or 25 years ago. We already talked about taking apart the value chain of companies, right? And digital would do that, and this is going to happen, and it never happened. So that's why I'm not so sure we'll see a lot of competition come in, because this is it's not a high margin industry at the first. That's why it's
Yeah.
not interesting for many players, actually, like Amazon or Google, who could easily do a lot of insurance business as well. So yeah, I've been wrong so many times. So maybe I'm wrong here too, but I've always predicted, a different thing, right? I predicted this will change the industry, but I never really did. So let's focus on more productivity, more growth, and we'll see players exit the market because they don't have the financial or people don't have the financial resources or the people to actually be able to keep up with other players. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this is going to change the dynamics of competition.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I just recently spoke with a VP in insurance, and in his previous role, he also worked a lot on partnerships with digital companies, and I think he shared your sentiment. It was like the last 15 years, I've seen so many new companies come and go, and none of them has really made an impact, and none of them has really changed the fundamentals of how our industry works. It's just a tough nut to crack, he said.
Yeah.
Maybe like, because we are on the Outcome Economy podcast, what we always try to
Yeah.
understand, and I think that's what the essence of good strategy also usually defines, is like, what are the outcomes that you are promising to your customers, right? So
Yeah.
how do you look at that? What are the outcomes that an insurance sells to customers? Obviously, like, there's a contract you sign, and if you go into like the worst case scenarios, you get money for it. But what's the
Mhm.
underlying outcomes throughout the customer journey? And how, maybe if we brainstorm a little bit, how could someone else, or how could technology help delivering these kind of outcomes in a better way, because you have more access to data, because you understand better what outcomes your customer actually needs? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and it's exactly right what you're saying. I think it's all about outcome ultimately, and if I don't believe, what I just said, if I don't believe that the business model is fundamentally changing, then the only way to get better is to change, get to better outcomes, right? So, and I think there's a lot of potential, honestly, in the insurance industry to get to better outcomes. So, to the beginning of your question, what are we expecting from an insurance company? I think, everyone can probably answer it for themselves, but I'd say it's security.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you want to be sure that someone takes care of something that might happen, and that could, financially be a problem. So that's why you want to be insured. And then everything else is, it's a little bit like, Costolani said about investing. You basically buy a stock, then you bury it, and you look at it again 20 years later. That's the best way of investing. That was his perspective on that. And I think with insurance contracts, it's the same. We don't care, huh? As long as we know someone will take care if something happens, we don't deal with insurance on a day-to-day basis. That's not going to change, despite all our efforts to, create service stuff around it.
Yeah.
And then, so security is the one, and the other one is hassle-free, I would say. And that's where outcome comes into place, right? It's all about, if I have a problem with my car, or I have a leak in some of my water lines, or something happens to my house, or whatever happens. I'm sick. My tooth need to be repaired. Whatever it is, I want someone to take care of that. And you have a service industry, or whether it's doctors or car repair shops or whatever, taking care of that, and then someone will pay for it, and that's the insurance company. and you want that to be hassle-free. But as I said, you spend 20 minutes on the line with someone who doesn't solve your problem ultimately, and then you have to call back, and stuff takes long, and you don't know what's going on, and so there's so many frustrations with customers with their insurance companies, and it's all because it's not easy to do business with them.
Yeah.
And that's what technology can change fundamentally. So if we look at outcome, the outcome needs to be first, problem resolution in the first contact. So if as a customer you call, you say, I've had an accident with my car, I want, from there, everything to be taken care of. And I don't want to, be part of that process. I don't want to take any decisions, whatever. And first contact resolution or problem resolution is a big problem in the industry because you talk to people who are not well educated, who don't have all the data, or it takes them very long to actually collect all the data from multiple IT systems when you're on the phone. And there are no experts in what they are doing there because they have to answer questions on health insurance as well as car insurance as well as life insurance. And you can't be an expert on all of that. So it's a quite frustrating experience. If you use technology to help them find the data much more quickly, give them scripts of what they, do a sentiment analysis of, what your customer's problem is right now and how they feel. There's a lot of ways to improve that, right? And it doesn't need to be a chatbot. You can still leave the human in the loop, but it could also be a chatbot. Huh? And they could be much better than humans could solve your problem. So I think we looked into service, into different customer journeys in the industry, and we feel short term we will see a productivity lift. I mean, short term meaning in 12 months, a productivity lift of 20% if we
Yeah.
support with Gen AI. Long term or midterm, let's say 3 years, maybe 5 years, between 40 and 60% productivity lift, just in service, and also in claims, which is a service as well, right? So there's a huge potential, and you can use that. You don't have to fire 50% of your people. You can use that productivity to actually spend more time with customers, be more empathetic, right? Try to really solve a problem. So there's multiple ways to use that, but yes, the outcome
Yeah.
should be much better. The outcome of risk assessments should be much better.
Yeah.
The outcome of sales conversations and picking the right product for a customer should be much better. So all of this is going to help create better outcomes for customers.
Yeah. So I think that by the way is a whole separate conversation that is really important from my perspective. What do those 30, 50, 60% and more productivity
Yeah.
potentials mean? Because I really think and that is new compared to previous waves of automation. This is for a lot of white collar roles and highly educated people, right? So
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful sometimes, and this starts in the public debate, but also for leadership teams, reframing that a bit. I mean, it's change. Nobody likes change in their personal life per se,
Mhm.
particularly if it's not like self-started or self-initiated. But at the same time, I think we have those huge labor shortages, and I think actually, as you said, right, shifting resources, shifting people to more meaningful work where they can really make a difference within a company or beyond this company, actually it would be better for the greater good. It doesn't mean that suddenly all of those people are not needed anymore. It's just more relevant work. So I think that's
Yeah.
something that I expect this to come. It's a little bit on the horizon, but sometimes I feel like these kind of conversations, leadership teams are tiptoeing around that because everyone thinks it implies people have to go, and that's the
Yeah.
only way. But I think it's definitely not the only way, and probably not the most important one. So I really like how you describe these outcomes. hassle-free experience, particularly if like the circumstances, probably something bad has happened, so you don't want the additional hassle as well. I'm just wondering on the topic of the main outcome of security, if you think that a bit bigger, and it's like, I want to feel secure, I want to feel protected. And of course, that's not a new or a very original idea, but I'm wondering if with technology we'll also come more from problem resolution to problem prevention, right? So like, I understand you better, your life better, I have more data. I, as your insurance partner, might be able to even like, yeah, help you prevent problems, and you pay less. I think in automotive
Yeah.
insurance, we
Yeah.
have these kind of examples, right, where your pricing is connected to your driving behavior. But that's something where I'm really curious how far this might be taken by some insurance companies in the future.
Yeah. So, yeah, very good question. I think there's a lot of potential around, prevention in medical, as an example. I think the problem here is, and we, don't want to talk about regulation here, but our data protection, we have a huge database, right, of outcomes in medicine and in healthcare.
Yeah.
But we're not allowed to use it. Especially I think Germany is very keen about data protection. So, I think we're actually making our life more difficult than it needs to be. But yes, so, back to your question around prevention, I think we have quite some data that helps prevent stuff. And I think, if you take commercial insurance for a second, that's really, really important, because it will help to define what kind of security measures do you have to take in your production plant, right? A lot of that will be supported much more, by technology and less by the experience of an underwriting or risk assessor. There I see a lot of potential, which is already used, but it's going to be, create much more potential going forward. On an individual basis, it's interesting, right? Because we've seen car insurance companies try to do telematics to help especially younger drivers with additional services to help them think about how they drive, and how they can lower their rates, etc. It has not
Particularly
been used
potential
at
for
all.
male drivers, I think you have to say.
Yeah,
Thinking numbers as well.
especially for male drivers. That's true. And it's not. It has not taken off. There's a campaign for many health insurance companies to help people eat better, exercise more, give them incentives to do so. It's very difficult to create a connection between what do I do as an individual, Chris, or you do as an individual, Johannes, because we have predispositions,
Yeah.
whatever. So it's very difficult to create that clear link, and people don't like to. It's a little bit. I don't know. Sometimes I feel it's the freedom, right, to behave stupid, and insurance companies, because they create collectives, right? There are always people who behave well and people who behave stupid. And the people who behave well pay for the people who behave stupid.
Yeah.
At least, obviously the prices are different, but nevertheless, it's a collective, and we all take care of each other. And there's a lot of free riding of people who behave stupid, but it seems they continue to do so. So I'm not sure. I think there's a huge potential. I agree with you, but I haven't seen it pick up in the consumer market very much.
Huh. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thanks for that perspective and that little brainstorming. When I look into the insurance companies we work with, look into their strategies, I would agree with what you said earlier, right? I think that probably the next 5 years, full focus as it looks right now is really in making those productivity gains, those potentials really be fully leveraged, and there's billions to be unleashed. I'm just thinking like, yeah, obviously we as WorkPath, but also in general, defining these outcomes and how you could deliver them in a unique way in the end always leads to winning strategies. So I think that's an interesting perspective for the mid and the long term. And for me, my most exciting part of the job, right? Talking about strategy and how those
Yeah.
develop in its content.
Yeah, it's important. Please continue to do so. I think the industry needs that. Huh?
It's fun. Hope at least, also through conversations like today, we can contribute different perspectives there. You and that was a good segue. You mentioned regulation and how it limits probably also innovation in the industry. Do you have thoughts on regulation in the context of AI? I mentioned just recently launched the AI Act from the EU.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Very personal recency bias, but I'm still annoyed how I need to get to Google Maps now because EU regulation sort of like makes it much harder to access Google Maps, but that's a different topic. How do you think of that? Do we need regulation in AI? What could be the way for the EU so it's not just about regulation, but also this is a productive, a constructive thing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very complicated topic, honestly, and I'm clearly not a regulatory or regulation expert, but so I think there's no question that we need regulation, huh? Big time, and I think there's a lot of scenarios, and even folks like Elon Musk and others, other tech gurus, see the destructive power of AI and whatever the motivation is for them to actually voice that. But I think I mean, as humans, we don't understand what's going on there. I wouldn't want to be a regulator, honestly,
Yeah.
because it's such a big and such a complicated topic. Interestingly, so we on this tour I mentioned to the West Coast, we spent some time with the co-founder of Anthropic.
Hmm.
And he talked about their models, and he said it's they start a little bit like the Google approach when they started to go after the big search machines or search engines in their early days, and when they said don't do evil. It's a little bit, that's what Anthropic wants to do as well. So they want to understand the models better, but he says, and he creates their models. And he says we don't fully understand them. We don't fully understand what they're doing. We just look at what we tell them to do and what the outcome is, and then we look at the outcome and try to judge whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But what's happening in between, we don't understand completely. So if the creator of a model like that says that, I mean, and this is still early days, right?
Yeah.
So these models, they also said you will see in the next 2 years, these models are going to be so much more powerful than they are today. And by the way, the models that are now very expensive will be very cheap in 2 years because you also spoke about pricing, huh?
Yeah.
And he said, when you think about strategy, you need to think about the models that will be available 2 years from now. Because the speed in which you deploy them, it will take so much time. So you can already think about the models who you will see in 2 years. So there's a rapid development of this. The creators don't fully understand what's going on. How should a politician or a regulator understand what's going on? I mean, there's no way. So I think while we need regulation big time, I think it's a very, very difficult task to do so. If I look at the industry right now, as long as there's a human in the loop, as long as we don't host data that's not supposed to be hosted somewhere, whether in China or the US, right? I mean, as long as we apply to the standards we have today, I think there's no risk to using GenAI or AI in a context of a corporation. That's different, obviously, once we, deal with health data and, more personal data of customers. But as long as, a model is hosted in a company and the company uses the data it uses on a daily basis anyhow, right? We as customers give companies data, otherwise they can't create products for us, especially in insurance. I don't see a big problem. I think there's a much bigger problem around regulation and how we make sure that, AI doesn't take over at some point in time. But yeah, I think, that's what I would want to say. I think it's difficult to say, to really comment on specific paragraphs because it's always a political negotiation, and then it
Yeah.
ends up in a place where you ask yourself, why?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think if you take it seriously, it's sometimes some scenarios at least can be a bit scary, but
Yeah,
it definitely a very interesting time. No,
yeah,
as we're coming to the last part of the conversation,
yeah.
and I expressed my passion for talking about outcomes and the most important outcomes that make winning strategies. Would you mind? We're not going to details, but like, would you mind to share your view on what your own company is selling? Like, what are the outcomes businesses out there expect from BCG? I mean, obviously it's
BCG.
consulting.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's usually larger parts at least paid through billable hours and
Mm.
days. But what are the outcomes you expect from BCG?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's clear that any consulting firm needs to always focus on what's the outcome, what does our client want. I think we're so concerned about what our client wants that sometimes we lose, the independence of what a consultant should also display. But we're very much focused on outcome. How has that changed? So when I entered the industry, it was about 100-page decks, more or less, with nice or not so nice slides, and that was basically the outcome of a project. And then implementation was left to our clients. Today, it's much more about solving a problem. The life corporate life has become so complicated with all the technology that evolved. So we have an IT company, we have a data science group of, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 people. We need to bring different expertise together and build solutions for our clients. So it's a very, very different way of working today. We still do slide decks, huh? Don't get me wrong, but most of the work I do or my teams do is really about creating solutions or solving problems. And in many cases, clients today ask us to take part of the risk. So if we don't solve the problem, then we don't get paid in full. So I think that's how the industry is evolving, and it's continuing to do so.
Yeah. I think very much in line with the larger macro trends that we're a part of as well with WorkPath, right? From what's the worth of the strategy if you cannot get it into execution and moving along that journey, and seeing more and more outcome-based business and pricing models where you're not being paid for input or output. So very
Well,
much
and by
agreed.
the way, let me say that, and you know it, but so while we do, we define strategies, and as I said, it's all about making sure that this is implemented and building something or creating something, solving problems. And one of the biggest gaps I still see in companies I work with, is to actually manage outcome and measure outcome and steer towards outcome. So while we all agree on that, it seems to be so very difficult for them to do that. So it's a very important work you are doing there. That's what I wanted to say.
And for the audience, I didn't ask Chris to say that. Thank you very
No,
much.
you didn't.
I couldn't
No, you
agree
didn't.
more. Thanks. And I think that's another great segue for our outro. In one way or the other, we're trying to ask these same questions to all our guests on the Outcome Economy podcast. And it's like 3 or 4 rapid fire questions. So Chris,
Okay.
let's start with that. What are some of books that you recently read that you might want to recommend to our audience?
So yeah, I saw that in your list of questions. So I quickly prepared for that. So there are two I would recommend right now. One on a personal
Yes.
level, which goes back to what are my goals. It's a German book. There's probably an English translation, I don't know, by Daniel Schreiber, and it's called Zeit der Verluste, or Time of Loss. So I think we all experienced quite some loss in the past 5 years. Loss of security, loss of uh, freedom in COVID times. So a lot of losses, and also some personal losses I experienced. It's a very, very good book with a very positive spin on it. So it's something, and it's a short read. I would really recommend. And then there's another one that a good friend of ours, Johannes,
Mhm.
another Johannes, has recommended to me. I don't know whether he recommended it to you yet. I must admit I haven't read it, but I'm just going to use it. It's called Making Great Strategy,
Uh-huh.
and by two professors from Columbia Business School, I think. Sorensen and Carroll. I haven't read it yet, but it's here, and I need to read it. Especially chapter 6 is supposed to be really good. So
Ooh, okay.
I'll
Quite
pass it
specific.
on.
Awesome.
Yeah,
You're adding this to the show notes as well. Yeah. Thank you
yeah,
very much.
yeah,
Seems like a lot of
sure.
dots connecting here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's books. How about other media podcasts? Do you listen to podcasts? Any podcasts you would recommend?
Yeah, so I listen to podcasts, but not enough. So it's a very interesting question because I really love podcasts and I like to go deep into topics. I listen to New York Times,
Yeah,
their audio program that just started, just to keep me. I think within BCG, there's so much information we get about what's going on in the business world.
I imagine.
I'm trying to focus more on politics and stuff outside.
Yeah,
But frankly, I must say, if I sit in a car, that's the typical, or even in a plane or in the train or whatever. The typical time to actually listen to podcasts, I normally put on a playlist depending on my mood. So it's music really because that's what helps me relax. So I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts in my free time, but rather try to let my mind sort of drift off into other places.
yeah. I guess something, at least speaking for myself, that needs to be learned as well, right? All the content I do really like consume all kinds of media, but sometimes it's somehow underestimated to have these slots where you just don't do anything and create
Yeah,
that space for your mind. I agree. So last
yeah.
question, where can our listeners find out more about you? What's the best way to engage with you if maybe someone is interested working with you and your team?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, and which reminds me, I need to update my profile again, and obviously also bcg.com. If you
Right.
want, please give me a call or send me a text or whatever.
Sounds great. So you update it, and then we put a link to your profile
No,
into
it's pretty
the app as
updated,
well.
but it needs to be updated again, right?
Okay. Chris, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope to continue the conversation in one way or the other very soon. But I think it was a great overview of how AI and particularly Gen AI finds its ways into corporate strategies, and then do this little deep dive Gen AI in insurance in your industry. So again, thanks a lot for your time and hope to see you soon again.
Thanks for having me.